Hello, my name is David. I run MLTV. It's a talk show about OCaml, Rescript, and Reason. I often bring guests from the community to talk about them and meet them, and asking a lot of questions about the language or what they are working on, and of course having fun with Hanley Miller type system. That's part of the show. I work for Ahrefs. It's actually this company. And today I'm interviewing a coworker, so it's going to be a little bit a branded stream. Hope you understand. It's a lovely company. Apply if you're looking for a job to work on a common or reason. Aside from that, I maintain Style PPX and implementation of React on the server. But that's just enough about me, and I'm going to introduce our guest, Louis. Hello, Louis. How are you?
Hi, good, and you?
Good, very good, very good, very good. So you you obviously work at Ahrefs. At what team do you work?
So this is a changing. This is recently changing, but I have been in the backend forever. I mean, since like 7 years ago, and I still have some of the projects that I had when I joined. So this was stable. And I'm in
Well,
this new
nice.
team called Middle End. So Href is not very good with naming. You know, we say that it's the hardest thing in computer science, right? We have front end that is actually full stack. Then we have a backend, which is more like data. And now we have middle end, which is somewhere in the middle. So I'm supposed to lead this new middle end team,
Nice,
and we'll see how it goes.
nice. Yeah, today I think we're gonna answer a few questions about Ahrefs. I think has been a mysterious company if you look it from the outside. But yeah, I think when I joined, I think you helped me understand a lot of things that I didn't know about Ahrefs. So I might just fire them the same questions that I did, just record it so everybody
Sure.
can understand it. So aside from Ahrefs, who are you, and can you present a little bit about yourself?
This is a tough question. Who am I?
Tough question.
Uh, so yeah, I grew up in France. I'm French. Still I'm French. But I've been living in Singapore for 7 years, so with Href for 7 years. I've been working in OCaml my whole life, basically, because my first job was in OCaml, and Href, which is my second job, is in OCaml too. Uh, so I cannot say that it's better than the rest because I never tried the rest.
Right.
And yeah, so I've been involved with OCaml, like the OCaml meetup in Paris for some time. I'm like on the online community. I'm part of the OCaml Code of Conduct Committee, which is an effort that was started last year, I think. So far, we don't have a lot of work, so that's good. But yeah, I'm one of
Right.
5 doing this. And then outside of that, I'm a pretty normal person. I'm like 31 years old, and yes, that's about it, I would say.
Right. That's about it. Yeah. So you have been writing Camel for a long, long time.
I've
That's
been
fair to say.
writing OCaml since I'm 16 or 17 was when I wrote my first line. So like
Yes.
14 years ago, something like this.
Okay.
There
Okay.
was no
So why
Merlin at the
why why?
time.
Right. Right. There was like no LSP.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. The first question is like, how did I mean? 15 years is such a long time, but how do you see the evolution of the entire language? I mean, would you split it in chunks? How have you seen the progress of the language?
It's hard to say. Uh, when I joined like the OCaml world, it was because of people who nowadays are like fairly important, like Gabriel Scher, who's working in RIA, I think, but he's like one of the main maintainers of OCaml, right? So he was like in this French forum pushing very hard people to try OCaml,
Right.
and I got convinced. So I started just writing a few lines here and there, and then I just stick to that for a long time. But I've been mostly a user like this. So I just like my usage has extended over time. but I've never been a core contributor. So my point of view is more as a user. The biggest difference is the size of the community, I would say. It's much more dynamic than it used to be. We used to install packages like OCaml libraries using Debian packages, right? So it was
Right.
apt install something.
Right.
There was no OPAM, there was no Merlin, there was no VS Code, right? LSP
Right.
didn't exist. So way less library. And I think you can see today how it was in the past, because you can see we have 10 different libraries to do HTTP 1.1.
Right.
We have 10 different standard libraries, and it's legacy of what OCaml was in the past. We used to have
Right.
all those smart people, but they had no way to collaborate. There was no OPAM, there was no way to share your work, and everyone was smart enough to rewrite
Build
the
your own
whole.
library for HTTP.
Yes,
Right. Right. Yeah, that's always interesting for me. Like the how Camel got so many different things that are hard to create. Right. Like standard library, I think recently there was like a containers reached 10 years. So it's
yeah,
like what? Like I what? It's like it doesn't make much sense.
but
If you look at now, it doesn't make much sense. But if you look at historically, that it does make sense.
and when you have no choice, you do it. Like you don't know that it's
Yeah.
hard. You just see, I can do it, and you do it.
Yeah.
And
You need to think it's easy, right? Like you need to start the library or the problem saying, "Oh, it's HTTP library, easy," and then you start, and then you suffer a little bit, and then eventually you you create something.
yeah,
Like
there are two.
last week. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, last week I tweeted that OCaml suffers a lot from the Python paradox. That the Python paradox, I think somebody write it. I think was I don't know the name of the guy, but somebody write it in 204, I think, 2004. Sorry, that when you use Python for a company, you get the smartest people that they want to innovate, and you have the pioneers of the language, and then you by default try to hire people that are in love with software. So eventually they create good software, or they are willing to suffer from getting out of the comfort zone and create software. And so, and I believe Kama is in the same spot. How can you see, like, is that true? Do you agree?
I don't know if that's true. I mean, it's partially the strategy of Ahrefs, so I have to say it's true. Uh, so yeah, I think it's partially true, but it's not completely correct. And for OCaml, at least it's a bit different from Python because OCaml has this strong academic influence. So a
Right.
lot of people are actually researcher, and there is a big benefit is that they have not free time, but they manage their time. They manage what they work on, and they decide
Right.
what is important. And so they got all this time to actually write this complicated code many times, because actually it's part of their job, like to just redo the same thing
Right.
in a better way. It's normal. You have to explore a subject. It's okay to do it multiple times, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's a combination of okay, those people are working in the right place, they have the right time, and they have the correct background too. It's like a lot of people were working on subjects that allowed them to do it. So some it's because they were very strong in writing languages. Some it's because they have this strong Unix background, I would say.
Right. Yeah,
Xavier,
yeah. It's very Unixy. Like the start of OCaml is very Unixy. That's true.
Xavier
That's
who
true.
wrote this lippy thread, I think that was used in Linux forever. So there is this background, and probably it's a bit different in Python because it grew more in the industry rather than in
Right.
an academic setup. But for sure, if you try to target people who live in a niche, you find people with a different interest from the main programming community, I would say.
Right.
But at the same time, I think some of the best meetup or conference I've been to were Java meetup.
All
Because
right.
Java, they know that their language is boring. I mean, the language is the same since 20 years or 30 years. I mean, there are some changes, but they don't really care about the language too much. And it's a huge, huge, huge community, right? So basically, everything already exists.
Yeah.
So there is no big bragging right. Like everyone can do everything. There are like 10 versions of everything, whatever. But the benefit is that they are super open-minded. Like something is new, something is different. Okay, let's see that. So it's not you go to that meetup and they will not talk only about like the fancy new feature in Java. It's like I saw this new Git tool. Oh, it's funny. Okay, let's try to use this. Also a
Right.
new way to do like web development. Okay, let's study the subject. And it's not about Java itself. It's because the language is not interesting enough. It's about like other programming stuff. So
Right.
it's very fun to attend to.
Right. That's a good one. That's a good one. Actually, many people that now starting to hear OCaml for the first time after they leave or they got kind of disappointed with the Rust kind of like policy drama, and these people can kind of like get into OCaml uh, because I don't know some influencer wanted to bash on Rust, so like they start exploring other languages, and of course OCaml is one of those. Aside from Zeek or whatever that you compare with uh, low programming language. Do you see those kind of like influencers move people to actually try the language and deploy it into users and doing serious stuff, or it's more like uh, kind of like vain marketing?
So I'm not a big Twitch person, so I don't know
Right,
like
but you
modern
can imagine
influencers. But yeah,
that's
I
true.
think
But
it exists in two forms, right? I mean, in the past, it existed in two forms. Like you had influencers, you had like the Rob Pike and who's the other person, but the two person who are behind Go, right? They
right,
didn't make a good language, but they were influencers. They were like, oh yeah, we did UTF-8 and like a Plan 9 in the past, and we work at Google. Oh, it's going to be amazing.
right.
So, no, it's a crappy language, but like they are influencers, right? So they move people.
Okay. Okay.
They
So
are moving
would you
and
say that Go is crap?
Go the language. I mean, I haven't used Go too extensively,
Luis,
but
this is recorded. This is recorded. This is not a beer in
yeah.
Singapore. This is recorded. But you can obviously bash in other languages. That's part of the game.
Uh, let's say Go is not the most modern language there is, right?
Right. Right. Thank you. This is just for the headlines. We don't want the headlines.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because Ahrefs is gonna be like announced. Nah, I'm joking. Yeah, yeah.
But
The thing is
okay,
in
on the
Okama.
same,
Yeah, go on.
sorry,
Go on, sir.
in the same topic of influencer, we saw it with Reason, right?
Right.
Like when Reason comes, it's not just a random person creating Reason. It's Jordan, and he comes with like his React background, and he comes with like followers.
Right.
So he is not doing videos online, but it's the same idea. So I think yes, it has definitely an influence, and like OCaml grew a lot when Reason started.
Yeah, that's true.
So I definitely think it has an influence.
That's true. Yeah. From the Okama community, how have you have seen the region creation and adoption from your point of view? You can bash on reason if you want. I might
No,
cry,
but
but
it's
you
like
can bash.
at the time, I think the OCaml community was one IRC channel, right? So it was a bit different from now. Uh,
Hmm.
I think uh, what I was not super convinced by when Reason the syntax arrived was that I think the original claim by Jordan was that he's making a better syntax.
Right.
And I was not super convinced that the syntax was better. And then there was uh, it was developed independently from OCaml, and by experience, I already knew at the time that if you start to like fork things or develop on your side and don't like integrate fairly quickly with upstream, it's actually never going to be integrated with upstream.
Right.
I don't know why exactly, but it's like it has happened a few times. But as okay, then there is a question of Bucker script, because right, reason is like
Yeah.
two sides. There is the syntax, which I only partially understood too, because I was not a web developer. I'm still not a web developer. So I
Right.
didn't know about GSX. I didn't know how powerful it was. And I think React
Right.
was not as big at the time too. But I think GSX is a nice idea. And there are a lot of like things in the syntax that are nice, right? Like parentheses around our arguments. It's a problem, but it has some benefits too.
Right. Yeah, I think the trade-offs were some trade-offs from OCaml, or at least some edge cases from the syntax from OCaml got resolved in Reason,
Yeah.
just by adding more like the parentheses or the braces or the semicolons. Well, yeah, yes, true. Well, semicolons not that big, but yeah, the others are kind of like remove some problems from the syntax, or not problems, but just the
Yeah.
edge cases from the cleanness for OCaml.
Yeah, and even
Good point.
sometimes it's not edge case, but it's nice to see very clearly, for example, when you apply a function,
Right.
where are the arguments, where it starts, where it ends.
Right.
So there are benefits, obviously, of like the OCaml syntax or Haskell syntax is lighter, we will say. It
Right.
has some benefits, but
And
I mean, the other one is nice too.
yeah, definitely. And you mentioned BuckleScript.
Yeah, and so Bucker script, I mean, I didn't have a
What
real
happened with BuckleScript? Because that was not so well received.
Yeah, I
Because I
think
think
because there was
they
GS of
forgot, right?
OCaml already.
Right.
There was GS of OCaml, and so again, it was like, yeah, I do something different, and I think Bob developed it fully inside Bloomberg at the time. Like basically, he came out and he had like, oh yeah, I have a new project and it's working already, right? He didn't like start
Right.
to develop it in public, and the community was much smaller too. So every time you split efforts like this, it's kind of costly. And people will say, yeah, we will try to collaborate, we will try to like make the two projects work together or whatever, and it never works. It
Yeah,
never
that
never never
doesn't happen.
works. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I understood all the trade-off. I'm happy that I invited Bob to the OCaml meetup in Paris.
Right. Yeah, because like
Retrospectively, it was a
for the
good
record,
thing to do.
yeah, for the record, Luis was running the OCaml uh, Paris meetup, I think, and
Yes.
then yeah, go on with the story.
And yeah, so when I moved to Singapore, I mean, I still organized one meetup, even though I was in Singapore, and I invited Bob to present Buckle Script. So at the time, it was a bit controversial because many people were a bit unhappy with what he was doing.
Right.
But I'm happy that I
Right.
did it. I mean, I didn't understood what I was doing exactly, but at the end, I think it was the right thing to do. Like even if the project died later on, you have to give such projects a chance.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say that project died. It's more like BuckleScript has been like
N-
working for 7 years, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, even if it was a failure, which is what not, but maybe like 6 months later, it could have died and disappeared.
Right. Right.
Uh, but yeah, I think when people have a drastically different approach, usually they have a reason
Yeah.
why they,
Yeah.
and so it's worth listening. And
That's
a
true.
lot of
That's
a
true.
lot of what Bob defended, I'm not sure I completely agree with it. Like he wants a very stable compiler, for example. So he said in Bloomberg they are using GCC 3 or 4, I don't remember, since forever.
Right.
So they don't need to upgrade the compiler, the GCC compiler, for example. So he thought the same
Right.
idea can apply to OCaml. We don't need to follow the upstream compiler all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Most companies actually they don't want to change compiler version. They want something stable. They want no surprise. So it has some value. All this stability has some value.
Yeah. That's true. But I think when he mentions about like the compatibility with the compiler, I think it's mostly uh, OCaml has been very stable since what six, 7 years ago, I think. I think there were like some small changes or some addition features, but nothing really break, and but mostly the syntax. But then he complained about like the parse, like the AST modifications that those were present, those were changing between versions. So like he wanted to not because PackerScript is a fork of the common compiler
Yeah.
and embedded into the kind of script now. So yeah, he was complaining about the AST transformations because every version changes a lot. There are migrations, so like you could write some logic to migrate from one to another. Uh, but but yeah, it's painful if you maintain a fork of this. You might suffer a lot from bleeding from one compiler to another. That's true.
Yeah, and I think for him, the even as an end user, the stability has some value. So it's interesting
Yeah,
for him to have a stable compiler,
yeah,
and even for his target, the people he's targeting, the stability has some value too.
yeah. Yeah. So after you mentioned that people were installing or sharing libraries through Debian packages,
Mhm.
uh, which yeah, I'm too I'm as old as you, but maybe I'm too young to see how those those package managers could work with apt get. So yeah, so what's the evolution of the tooling right now? I think we are in a state where we have two bigger players such as OCaml and Dune as package manager and build infrastructure, I would call it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But now Dune is exploring installing packages. So how do you see the tooling these recent years?
I mean, it's amazing. It's completely incredible.
Right.
Uh, then people will have different opinions on like is OPAM perfect or whatever, but it's like if you compare to what it was before, it's incredible. And I think even if you compare to other languages, it's a fairly solid experience now. Um, like OPAM is working well. You just need to learn the UI, but it's working fairly well. Dune is relatively fast, kind of easy to use. Um, the LSP is pretty magical. Like Merlin is a very solid tool.
Right.
It was one of the first, I think, I would say, like a small language with a tool as powerful as Merlin. And it's not only powerful; it's like avant-garde, right? It understood
Yeah.
already that you had to be able to do error recovery, and that you had to like change the way you parse files to be able to like work with something that is half broken.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Yeah, that's true.
but
That's true.
if yeah, I mean the people behind Merlin are super smart. So in a way, it's not a surprise.
Right. You actually contributed to the LSP and Dune, right? Like to both projects. I think I saw your contributions.
Yeah. I have commits on many small, like it's mostly small contributions, but I have commit on everything. I think at some point.
Right. Right.
Um, LSP, I participated in the like putting some like PPX deriving stuff, and like I wrote a bunch of commands. I implemented some Merlin behavior inside the LSP. Like if
Right.
you hover multiple times on the same value, the type will be more and more verbose.
Right.
So I took this behavior back to LSP. Dune, I have mostly like bug fixes, probably, or like small documentation,
Right.
nothing big.
Right. So one of the things that you mentioned as well that I think we talked about this before. It's like when OCaml was very young, all features that got added into the language were uh, PhD projects, right? Where it's like a student that is very uh, passionate, or maybe just like his tutor, well, his guidance is a OCaml fan, so he just explored it a bit like a language, kind of like in the theory on the academia, and then he worked on a paper, and eventually it get released as part of the language. That was the times where like maybe Jane Street not even started using OCaml seriously. So how like do you see that now? Do you see that those features or academic features got into language? do you think it's a kind of weird mix now, or they compose well together? How do you see language after these contributions?
I was looking today at the OCaml changelog
Right?
because I was wondering when was the release of OCaml 4, and that was 11 years ago.
Wow.
Because OCaml 4 is before
Wow.
to OCaml multicore is the last time there was a big change, which was a GADT. And in the meantime, there was like mostly small changes. I don't think the language changed much. But if we look, like what was the big features, we could say like the objects in OCaml, GADT,
Right.
OCaml multicore, they all were developed by people in like a research setup. And I mean, somehow it seems to work.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not a
Yeah, that's
I'm not
true.
a maintainer on OCaml. I think it works also because they don't have a lot of energy to integrate a lot of new features. So they are very, very picky on what they actually accept in the compiler.
Right.
So only the most solid implementations will get in.
Yeah, that's kind of true. I think the quality is something that every core team member says all the time. That this feature would be amazing to do, but our quality bar is very high. So yeah, you need to work on it much more to let us just even look at it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. That's
Then
true.
there are things, I mean, that do not compose super well, right? They are part of the module language and part of the object language that do not compose very well. You
Right.
can make the compiler more or less blow up, or like the compilation time will become crazy.
Right.
And actually, those are parts that I don't know very well. I very seldom combine first-class modules and objects.
Objects. Yeah, that's something I haven't done. Yeah. I think the only experience with that combination might be PBXlib, maybe because you have the traversers.
Okay.
But yeah, like you use them. You don't instantiate. Yeah, you instantiate the traverser. You don't do anything with like internal states of anything. So yeah, yeah, good point.
So
One thing that maybe it's worth saying is that right now you work at Ahrefs for 7 years. At the beginning, when Ahrefs peaked OCaml, or Igor, our CTO, came with OCaml in the back, there were like not many companies working on like using it, using OCaml. Now we have like
right.
Tezos, Tarides, Ahrefs, of course, Lexify, Bloomberg, Bsport, like many companies that have even some of them have their own forks of OCaml that they are experimenting and they're deploying it and whatever. But 7 years ago, do you think it's a risky decision? And the second kind of the question is like, how can you convince your boss about using OCaml?
I mean, for sure, I think picking OCaml at the time was a risky choice because, like, who do you hire? I mean, it's like
Right.
there are like 5 OCaml developers. In Paris, you can find people. In Paris, you can find students. You go to the OCaml meetup and like you can socialize and you can more or less build a company, which is what the previous company I was in called CryptoSense was doing.
Right.
This is how Bsport came to life, right? Bsport, it just like picked a few people around Vincent Bala, and then like you meet people, and you steal 1 or 2 person from the OCaml meetup, and you tell them, "Oh, join my company," and now
Right.
you have enough people to push a project forward. But how do you do this from another country?
Right.
So even today, I think it's not an
Somehow
easy
risky. Yeah,
choice.
that's true.
Yeah,
That's
I think
true.
today you can hire, but even if you have like I don't know 2,000 packages on OPAM, uh, the tooling is still or the libraries are not So there are not libraries for everything like you have in some other languages.
Right. Yeah, it's big enough, but it's not populated with everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are still, I don't know if we have like full support of gRPC. I'm not sure that we have complete support of HTTP 2 or 3. Many small, like, I mean, it's not that small, but many things like this.
Right.
So I would say it's, today I would say it's a risk. So how would I convince my boss to move to OCaml? I would, is it like a
Well, first is
new, yeah,
would you do it? Maybe you would not do it. Maybe you say, yeah, it's fine. Like we can do with whatever. With Java, you said that you enjoy the Java meetup, then you join a
yeah.
company writing Java. Like, would you be happy writing Java? Would you be fine, or would you would say, oh, OCaml here makes sense. Let's try to change it. How would you do it?
I think I will, if I was a small in a small company, it would definitely make sense to use OCaml. Okay, it's interesting because in a small company, you could say all the Java tooling has more value than in a big company. But at the
Right.
same time, you have less hands, right? So you need to be more productive per person, and you have less time for maintenance. And those are two things for which OCaml is very strong. Like you can write few lines of code that do many things, so it's very expressive. And at the same time, it's kind of solid enough that when you write your code, you can like launch it in prod and you can leave it there for some time and hopefully nothing breaks. And
Right.
the language is stable, the compiler is stable, so there will be like no big surprises. So I think that's very valuable. And then, I mean, you compare what are the alternatives today? Rust is incredibly hard. Like it's very, very hard language to use.
Right.
So you can do like fancy stuff. You have incredible community, but it's a super hard language to use. You have Python, but then you are losing all the type safety. You
Right.
have Go, which is like a bit in between those. You have like a fast Python, we'll say.
Right.
Then you have
Fast.
Java, okay, fast, yeah.
Right.
Java, which has a huge community, like a fast language. So in a way, I think OCaml is closer to Java. Like it's one easy language to use,
Right.
kind of solid, no surprises. Uh, the feature
Right.
set is not incredible, but it's working well enough.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's
you
a good
can do
point.
more or less what you want with it. You can do like work in the back end, work in the front end. Uh, it's kind of
Right.
approachable. So to me, it's like kind of a replacement to Java. So it's like a light
Yeah.
Java.
Yeah. Like when I'm mostly like front end. Now I'm doing some backend stuff, but I'm experiencing from front end. You are experiencing from backend, of course. Um, and when I'm talking to backend persons, always they from OCaml. I every time I talk with a backend person that only writes OCaml, they mention all that the runtime. And from the front end, it's a problem that I have never ever thought. I mean, I know that the problem exists because I kind of studied computer science and all these things. Um, but it's something that in the front end I never think about it. Um, how could you describe to me that I kind of know a little bit of the memory implementation and about the stack, the heap, how memory kind of works, even the ON notation, OBIG notation. Uh, how can you describe the runtime of OCaml from someone who doesn't know much about runtimes, so has nothing else to compare rather than Node, for example? That's my experience.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an expert either, but it's an
Right.
interesting point
Right.
actually, because if you go on, for example, the real world OCaml, there is a whole chapter on the
Yep.
runtime. So
Yeah.
I think it's important for the OCaml people because of their background. So we have those unique C people. So they have experience with C before, and because in C you need to know what is a representation in memory of everything you manipulate.
Right.
They kind of took that from C and bring it to OCaml, and those people they like to when I have like an integer, is going to be like actually like nowadays like what, 64 bits. But we have like
63, right? That's
yeah, 1 bit for
right,
the GC, and then we have 63 bits for the value.
right.
Um,
So yeah, people love the runtime. I think it's kind of like those things when, like,
but
if I
yeah,
start
but
talking about the front end, I can all the time, like, for me, I love CSS. So if I can talk all the time about CSS, but if you never kind of like have experience with the language or with designing the UI, CSS means nothing, right? CSS doesn't like, you understand what they are saying because the thing makes sense, but semantically it doesn't. So when you talk about the runtime at the beginning, for me, felt like I have never ever thought about this.
yeah, I guess it's two sides, right? There is like the technical side, how it's actually implemented. That when you allocate a value, where do you put it in memory? What is a representation of that value in memory? So, for example, we said yeah, the ints are 63 bits actually. That you allocate when you allocate a value, you allocate by words in OCaml. So, like you have one word, for example, if you allocate a value that is on the heap, you have
Right,
potentially two words. You have one word which is a pointer to the actual value, and then the values, which is like a number of words after that. And then you have and you have the GC. So when is it triggered? So actually, the GC can be running every time you can allocate a value, which means that you can write code that will not trigger the GC, right? So it means you can write code that is very fast because
right.
there will be no interruption, and I think that's critical for companies like Gen Street. But then, yes, the other side is the runtime from a user perspective. So I see it two way. I see one way that it's like no one knows about the runtime because it's very very simple in OCaml. Like you don't need
Right.
to deal with the runtime very often. You just know that you pass values by reference, so you don't make many copies, and then the GC is fairly fast and will not stop for too long.
Right.
So that's probably what 99% of the normal
Yeah.
OCaml people know about the runtime, right?
Yeah.
But then an interesting fact that comes with that is that the OCaml compiler is kind of bad by modern standards, that it's not doing any kind of optimization or very little
Right.
optimization. Yet, the native code is fairly fast. The native code that is generated for an OCaml program is fairly fast.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at the benchmark, it's like not too far away from C++, which is kind of surprising, right?
Yeah.
And it means that the language is kind of pushing you to write code that by default is fairly efficient.
Yeah.
So
That's exactly my experience. Yeah,
the
that has been
types that
exactly my
are
experience.
offered and the functions, the APIs that are offered, somehow allow you to write code that is not too bad.
Right.
I think it's kind of a miracle, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. So yeah, at Ahrefs, the kind of like the formula of the Coca-Cola of Ahrefs, it's kind of like the crawler, like the thing that navigates the internet and saves data. Um, and after that we have like the storage and all of these pieces that are complex. What can you explain about the secret sauce of Ahrefs? What are they from the outside? Like, many people would never ever write a crawler or yeah, or a very dummy one, but for a
Yeah.
one that indexes 9 billion pages, 1 trillion, yeah, I don't know the numbers, but like an insane amount of numbers. What can you explain?
Yeah, I guess the first question is what is a crawler, right? Uh,
Right. Yeah,
so
yeah, because
actually,
like you read a web page, you scrap a web page. That's kind of like fairly simple. You can do it in any language. But then, what do you store about this page? And more importantly, how you navigate to the next one. I think that these are the two main questions.
yeah, so what you extract, I mean, depends. Href, we care about the links, right? So what is Href building? It's more or less a map of the internet. So like it's the crawler is running all the time. It's downloading like, I don't know, like 4 million pages per minute or something like this. There is a
Right.
counter.
Yeah.
Every minute we crawl 5 million pages, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we have been talking for 40 minutes. So you can count how many pages we have downloaded over that period of time.
Right.
But so yeah, we download those pages, and then we extract the links. That is the main information we care about, but this is not the only information. So first is how do you parse HTML, and how broken is HTML on the internet, right? So this is horrible. Like the internet is broken, right?
Right.
So you have to extract all the links in a page, and then you have to store all those links. But when you store links, because like, what is a crawler exactly? Yeah, where does it start and where does it end? Like, is it only the part that is downloading the HTTP, or is it actually like the parsing too? And it's influencing how you are storing your data. Because so let's say you download a page, you have like 100 links in it. You do at least two things with those 100 links, that you want to reuse them in your scheduler to decide what do I crawl next.
Right.
And you also want to update counters because you want to update your map of the internet. Like, you downloaded a page, you know that there are links, and you want to update the map. And how do you update the map? Because you have like 100 new links. So what do? You update 100 small counters, like 100 small integers.
Right.
Okay, but then can you do it 5 million times per minute? And then can you do it in like many directions? Because it's
right.
like a graph.
You would loop. If you don't do it properly, you would loop forever. Right.
And it's like you have links between pages, but then you want to also count links between domains, and like you want to count links inside the domain.
Right.
And then how do you decide it's an interesting link or not? And then when you index a link, what do you index, right? So you need to index the link itself, but you want to index the text that is attached to the link, maybe the paragraph that is around that specific link. You could look where it is in the page. Is it visible or not? So you have... It's kind of an open question. That's an interesting question because there is no one that can say, I'm doing a crawler and this is the right way to do it.
Right.
So even big companies like Google, I mean, they make trade-off, right? So they decide we do it in one way, and then they gather information they can gather, but they cannot download every page on the internet all the time. Like, they cannot download and process stuff fast enough.
Right.
So there is more content that is created than content that can be downloaded.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because like if you think about like fixing a bug on a crawler, like it's kind of like usually when you have a database, you can run migrations or you can fuck it up data, you can store data broken, whatever, you can fix it. But if you have the history of internet, that's another source of data that it's live, right? It's kind of, I don't know the right metaphor, but it's kind of like if you have to fix a bug on the crawler, that means that you stored information wrongly. That can affect the next version of your map, right? Because it's not only a map; it's a map and the timeline, right? You can just like look it up. It's kind of like an archive as well. I think archives, if they don't have a crawler, I think they do have a crawler. But yeah, it's the idea of you can improve the crawler. So something that you didn't look before, now you are gonna look it up now. I don't know, like when I think at some point we at the beginning of it we started indexing. I think videos was like, I don't remember, like some media, right? I don't know, and that of course like blowed up immensely everything, right? They complicated everything.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Actually, it's how do you, because it is right that the database is very big, so you cannot just migrate stuff. So the big data page says we have 170 trillion rows in the database.
Right.
So we cannot just like push this data
first of all,
somewhere else. And
what technology is that running on?
I think that's a combination of different technologies. So that will be ClickHouse, and then some internal database, so like custom stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
What is claiming is like at Ahrefs, correct me if I'm wrong, but we like to build our own things mostly. Like when I have been in other companies, you would use, I don't know, Sentry for reporting, or you would use PagerDuty for live crashing, or you would use, I don't know, whatever tool that you or a web server, like a framework that runs your server. Blah, blah, blah. At Ahrefs, I think we implemented all of this by ourselves. That sounds both crazy from the outside, but when you join Ahrefs, like if you ever join the company, you understand perfectly why it has been done like that. So yeah, we have like our own database. So that's kind of,
but it's,
yeah.
I
It
mean,
sounds scary.
yeah, it's not completely our own database. It's more like a wrapper around like existing database. But it's partially because we have no choice, right? It's like the problem is
Right.
large enough that you don't have a ready-made solution.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And Google was like this for a very long time. Like they had MySQL. I think that they used like very, very, very extensively MySQL. And it's just that they used it in a way that was working for them. So they don't have like a giant MySQL database, but probably they just sharded the problem. So they have like a one small database per server, and they have a smart way to send the task to the right server to retrieve the data they want. Because you have to build on top of something. We are a small company, right? The total number of employees, I don't know, it's 100 plus now.
Yeah.
But the backend team is still 15 people or something like this. So we don't have like too
Yeah,
many
that's insane.
hands.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, just to
And yeah, and so yeah, you ask like what you do when there is a bug in the crawler, and I mean it affects how you conceive the programs, because you know that something will run forever. So
yep.
you have the strategy becomes I don't want to fix bug by hands. It's like you have a auto healing index. So
Right.
you crawl a page for the first time, and let's say you make a mistake. The number of links you counted is off by one,
Right.
and you know it was like this for 3 days because like you deployed, it was broken. 3 days later, you notice it. And you cannot go back in time. It's like it's already too late.
Right. Right.
So instead, what you do is that you fix your crawler, and the way you store the data, you make sure that the next time you crawl the page, it kind of override the previous version
Right.
with something that is correct now. So yeah, you have to have those auto healing processes,
Right.
and you cannot attend to every small detail by hand. And the like full rebuild of the index will be like the last resort. It's like
Right.
only if you have
Did
absolutely
ever
no
happen?
choice.
Did that ever happen?
It partially happened. So not everything, but there are things that were rebuilt once in a while. So we were storing two things because like we download pages, we download the HTML that we store, and then we have two kind of counters. Like we have the counters we extract from the page. So let's say you have like one link that you see twice in a page. So you have this link and the number 2 attached to it. And then you have diff. So you store a diff.
Right.
Let's say because you downloaded that page that belongs to the domain href.com. And so now you see that that specific URL, for example, has 3 links that were not present before. So you store somewhere +3. And later on, you will aggregate all those +3, +1, -1 together. So those are
Right.
two different things, right? You have like the absolute numbers, and then you have those diffs. And
Right.
so once in a while, we have a bug that we didn't compute the diff correctly, then we will rebuild the diff from scratch. So we will go back to those absolute numbers,
Right.
process them all together, and then restore it. And then when it happens, it can take a month, but it hasn't
Right.
been done in a long time. But
Right.
it's a long process.
Right. That's interesting. That's interesting.
But this is where OCaml is shining too, because it's very easy to have multiple versions of the same type, for example.
Right.
So it's not if you store data with a version number in the database, You can like you have a variant.
Yeah,
It's
call it
like
differently, or
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's fairly automatic,
that makes sense.
and yeah,
Right. Yeah, as well, we have diffing on HTML, right? Like one of the big features that we did, I think that was like last year, that we have diffing for the content of the page. So we as well like, or the diffing of links, we have as well like diffing of content.
yes.
So yeah, that's
Yeah, we
that's
have a
that's
lot of
crazy.
small funny features. We are like one of the first company after Google, obviously, to render pages at scale.
Right.
So
Right.
we have like hundreds and hundreds of servers running Chrome, and then as much as possible, when we download the HTML of a page, which is like the raw HTML, then we will put it in Chrome, let it run for a while, and then get the rendered version of that, which is incredibly expensive
Right.
in time-wise, because
Yeah.
like it's much harder work than just downloading the HTML. But we couldn't do this if there was no project like Chrome that would be open
Right.
source and usable for free. And so we are standing on the shoulders of giants for this.
Right. Yeah. Imagine like trying to create a browser engine just to see the pages on the server. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. And what's the favorite part of working at Ahrefs?
To me, it's the people. I mean, it's like you because I mean, like I'm not SEO expert, right? So it's like I'm not a SEO fan either. So I didn't join Ahrefs because I love to study the internet. That was not
Right.
my goal, and I'm not a marketing person, so I don't have like a big use for SEO by myself. Um, at first, when I joined, I think the technical challenge was fun. But nowadays, to me,
Yeah.
the value is more like the people. Like you get to meet smart people who work on like complicated projects.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time dealing with interns, for example, which is super gratifying, I feel. I try to spend like a good amount of time sharing with other people, like working on the tooling or stuff like this. And I really like
Right.
that part. Like you can see the influence you have on other people when you make their life easier.
Right. Right. That's good. And what's your favorite part of Canva?
Of OCaml,
Yeah. And you
when
couldn't
it
say the
com-
people. You
when
people.
it compiles, it works, right? That's the key point.
Right. That's a good point.
Unlike Go, we have some types.
Right. Right.
So, no, but I mean, if we are a bit serious, maybe not the language itself, but the LSP is super good nowadays. It's like definitely a very good
All right.
experience.
Yeah. 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 I
And we
think
have
when.
to, yeah,
Mhm. No. No. Go on.
we have to thank Tarides for all the work they are doing on the tooling over the past, 3 years now,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
crazy.
I think that is carrying most of like the boring work. Not boring work, but my kind of like work is always hidden, right? That you don't get any fame, but you only get the trash when the tooling doesn't work. You complain, and when tooling works, you just don't celebrate, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is behind, for sure, for sure. You have been going to ICFP. ICFP is International Conference the Functional Programming for quite
Yeah.
some time. One of the kind of the vertical, so kind of the parts of ICFP is OCaml. Last year we outgrow our neighbors, our language neighbors. I think it was Scala maybe or Haskell.
Oh yeah,
We outgrow our
Haskell, I think, yeah.
neighbors. I think we outgrow them. What do you think of the conference?
I mean, same thing. It's amazing to go there and meet the people actually, because at ICFP, so it has multiple parts, right? The main track is a bit more academic, even though some people who work at Ahrefs, they publish there, but they were students when they did it.
Right.
So it's a bit more academic. And then you have all the workshops. that are a bit more approachable, at least for me. But you spend 1 week with smart people who are very excited by
Right.
what they are doing. So this is the amazing part. Once a year, everyone is super happy to meet each other.
Right.
So this is very much a good experience. But it's about conferences. I think the ReasonML ones were very nice too.
Right.
And again, I'm a backend person, but it was super cool to attend a conference on like a different topic where people have different interests. And it was the early days of the language, so the people who attended were curious and wanted to see something new. They had different ideas.
Right.
So I think that was super good.
Yeah. Yeah. Those conferences were very good. I haven't attended any actually, but yeah, I heard Javi saying amazing things about them. Almost everybody who attended said good things. Um, so yeah, why there's no OCaml conference? Do you think it's because
Dedicated.
of like the right dedicated?
So this is a multifold answer.
Okay.
Because it's actually a question that was asked. There is this, how is it called? The OCaml Software Foundation, right? Okay, because if we can explain how OCaml, the management of OCaml, is that they are like
Please do
yeah,
as core contributor of the code of conduct. Please do.
there is like the core group of contributors for the language, and out of that, before there was something called the OCaml Consortium, I think, where
Right.
companies could pay a few thousand USD a year, and it will give them a license to use OCaml not as an open source project. Like you could get the compiler and like do changes on it, and you didn't have to publish the changes again.
Right.
But it was also a way to just like sponsor the OCaml development.
Right.
And they took it to a different level. They created this OCaml Software Foundation that is pushing some efforts around OCaml. And one question was, do we want to like have an OCaml conference, or do we want to have OCaml, maybe not conference, but like smaller events, but that could happen more often? Like, where would we put those events in the world?
Right.
But it's like you need people with time, you need people with money, and you need to find like the right place for the right people to
Right.
attend. So I think no one has all those resources, including like the mental space to build like fancy ideas on what to put in a conference.
Right.
But it's not, I mean, I cannot provide a definitive answer because I'm not the one deciding on all those things. But I think, yeah, it's like a combination of all those that makes the ICFP kind of the place to be.
Right. Right. Yeah, because this year is on Seattle, right? Like the
Yes,
places every year it changes the location.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, like last year I didn't, but yeah, OCaml released multi-core and effects or handling effects. And we chatted a bit a lot about at work about this. And I think you said like multi-core was not something that kind of like something that needs to happen, but you are not very excited. But on the contrary, you said the effects are a big deal. Um, Thinking about the person that doesn't know much about what effects are, could you first do a kind of like a short summary and then explain why those are exciting?
I mean, I'm not a specialist with FX either.
Right.
But to me, a parallel will be to talk about Rust, right? In Rust, you have
Okay.
those ways to like, how is it called? Like the borrow checker. Like you have a way to know to who one value belongs, right?
Right.
And it heavily affects how you are writing code, because then you need to architecture your code in a way that that is safe? Like, do you know that, for example, that value can only be used by one bit of code at a time?
Right. Otherwise, you would have crazy bugs, right? Like data corruption,
Yes, so
mutation
that will be
everywhere.
C.
Right.
And so yeah, Rust came in and was like provided this kind of safety.
Right.
And I mean that's a bit the same idea in OCaml, right? So it's like you come with effects, and I think it has many usages that I do not completely understand. Um, but some of them are allow us to change the way we do like concurrent or parallel computations, and it makes it safe, like the borrow checker makes the Rust code safe.
Right.
So this is definitely affecting the way you write code, because now you have one more tool to express your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is definitely like changing the way the language will be used. While the multi-core, it's just in the background it is happening. But this is not the tool. This is just a mean. So it's like, how do we do fast computation? We need to split stuff on different cores, and like how do you do it? Either you fork or you do multi-core.
Right.
But in a way, it could be completely hidden behind a magic API, and I will not know if it's fork or multi-core, and it will be fine to me, like as a user.
Right.
But if you have something like the borrow checker in Rust, this is actually a language feature, and this is something I see day to day, and it is affecting how I can think and what I can express.
Right. I see. I see. Yeah, because right now one of the works of one of the features that Jane Street, kind of like the kind of like famous company that does the Wall Street and whatnot, and pushes OCaml for the next level. They have a team working on the OCaml compiler. And one of the big features that they want to work on, I think they're call it locality or local or global
Yes.
variables. Would that express? I have no idea about those rather than watching Stephen Dolan the presentation on last ICFP about this. But would that allow some of the users of OCaml that they do care about the memory layout or kind of the owner of the variables to express those different changes regarding using multicore?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I have a light understanding of that. To me, I think it would be interesting even if there was no multi-core. The
Right.
stuff they are doing, local, global,
Right.
because we already had like concurrency with LWT or stuff like this, and it has benefits because you control your allocations too. Like you can decide what is allocated on the stack versus what is allocated on the heap. So you can make like it can have big performance implication. So this is kind of an exciting feature,
Right.
but this is maybe where you see my C background. That when I was in uni, one of the first the first year was just like writing some C code, and we had to rewrite like a Bash. So we had like our own version of Bash. So we spent like 2 months writing a Bash.
All right.
Or stuff like this. So we had to deal with many of those small you are launching a bunch of processes together, and you have to like kind of manage your memory or whatever. Or we had to rewrite malloc. So
Okay.
So yeah, I know a little bit about like memory management and like how to deal with pointers because I did those projects in the past, and so like these local global things seems appealing. But at the same time, it's probably not critical. Like it's not
Right.
going to change the vast majority of the code that is written in general. Like all my small personal projects, or even most of the code that is running at Ahrefs, performance is not key. Like
Right.
I care more about the fact that the code is readable and stable rather than performance, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, only in some areas. Yeah, I see your point. Like that, usually code from, for example, just like a web API, OCaml is we're like way fast enough, right? Like
Yeah,
there's no point to optimize the endpoints, right? Like most of our endpoints, I think we have like 500 endpoints. That's optimizing one by one or optimizing like 10% of them. They would not change absolutely anything.
yeah. We spend so much time doing like queries to different database or
Right.
like just HTTP query to gather whatever we need to gather before to answer a request. And this is so expensive compared to what we do most of the time.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Well, and why do you think Ahrefs is just a different company? Like when I have experience with kind of like it's because of the culture maybe, but like when I have been on other companies, we here in Ahrefs we don't have middle management, we don't have product owner, we have many things that when you come from working on the SaaS companies that are from kind of the culture of US maybe, or if some Europe companies, in Ahrefs we don't have anything like that. And can you say that's good or bad, and why?
It's good and bad. There are definitely some downsides.
Right?
Why it's like this? It's also because the company is kind of young and kind of small too.
Young,
So
young,
yeah, because it's like what 10 years old. So it takes
right?
time. Every time you want to make a change company wide, it probably takes 2 years to actually make the change happen.
Okay.
And so this is not the only company with a structure that is not well defined.
Right.
But what happens is that there is a structure. It's just people don't have the title because actually, when you have been in the company for like a long time, you kind of like you own some bits of codes,
Right.
and there are people who are expert on a subject, and then there are people that you trust for something, and people that you trust for something else. And so there are actually, even though there is no direct management, there are people taking decisions. So they who is taking the decision, right?
Right.
Uh, but sometimes, so it's good to be flexible and to it allows like more or less anyone at some point to take a decision if they want to and if they are there to. The downside is that sometimes you don't know if you can take the decision or not, and you don't know who you should talk to. And then there are some hidden politics because like some products, some features, they belong to someone. You
Right.
don't want to offend that person, so you cannot go and touch this or like stuff like this.
Right. I think I would. Well, I need to interrupt here. I think you have been way too long at Ahrefs to realize what politics at work means, because like at Ahrefs there's literally zero politics. You know, like not politics, but kind of like battles or discussions for the
Mm.
sake of discussion. It's nearly zero, right? I think that's one of the things that at the beginning I was like, what are we not talking about this? And somebody said, no need to. And this kind of like culture of getting very direct and very kind of like technical focus. I think when you work in a company that you can be, I don't know, weeks without knowing what to do, or just like months working on OKRs, or like working on so many processes that are close to useless from your point of view, or maybe very beneficial, but from an individual contributor, uh, yeah, you feel like you are losing your time. And Ahrefs, I think I haven't, not a single day I thought, oh, I'm losing time because of the company. It's the other way around. It's like, oh, my peer is asking me to implement something that needs to be done, and I haven't finished yet. That's more like the feeling of the,
Yeah,
the, the work, right? Yeah.
I guess it's not politics like looking for power because there is
Right.
no power
Exactly.
to gain. Like,
Yeah. Exactly.
what do you want to
Yeah.
own? Like, there is no, there is nothing
Yeah.
to own. You can try, but there is
Yeah.
nothing to win at the end.
Yeah.
Um,
The one of the I'm getting to the last questions now, but kind of like, have you been following a little bit what Javi, Antonio, and kind of a little bit of myself, having working in Melange. Um, what's
So
your opinion about Melange?
I know what Melange is.
Definitely.
Okay, what do I think about Melange? Uh, Again, it's a question with that is hidden other questions,
Right.
hiding other questions. Because, okay, let's say technically, for example, this is pretty impressive.
Right.
What the four of you have been able to do in a few months is kind of amazing. Because just to give some context, I mean, it's like a moving. Okay, Melange was not super alive. Let's say what 6 months ago. Like the
Right.
project was kind of moving, but slowly. There was no Dune support. There was not much stuff happening. And then 6 months later, you have the whole Href front end, which is like hundreds of thousands of lines of code that are written by what 30 people maybe now.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost
It's
ready.
completely moved to Melange. So this is kind of amazing.
Yep.
And I'm able to compile all this code in like one command. I go in the repo, I do like make dev, and everything works.
Nice. Yep. These
So
and many more advances. But yes, that's the part that it's funny. Yep.
it's kind of amazing. It automatically works, and it didn't break the experience of anyone. So it's kind of compatible with what was like BuckerScript or ReScript beforehand, and it's compatible with the native code at the same time. So it's kind of amazing. What do I think about the project? Another side of the question will be like,
Yep.
was it the right thing to do to fork ReScript, or like? Um, is it the right way to do it? Like, is it good to have like a fork of the compiler inside Melange to achieve that project?
Right.
I don't have a strong opinion on it. I don't have enough experience. After all those years of seeing Reason and BuckerScript evolving, I kind of believe that the experience of the end user, so the developer that is using those tools, is more important than the technical implementation.
Right.
So is it the best way to do it? I don't know. Does it give a good end user experience? Yes, then that was the right thing to do.
Right. So
So
on those tools, you would always prioritize the developer experience rather than the technical merits, or how would you choose?
as a user or as the developer of those
I
tools?
mean, as a developer of those tools.
As a developer of those tools, I think, I mean, given the target, given what I see of how you build a community, uh, and it's like the early days of Melange, I would
Right.
prioritize like user experience.
Right.
So I think, for example, all the efforts that Javi put into making Dune work, I think the target was a user experience at the end,
Yeah.
because we could
Yeah. Of
have
course.
make it work another way. And if we didn't have this, I'm not sure that we would have moved to Melange, for example.
Yeah.
And
I
so
see.
what the downside was is that, for example, this is not the fastest implementation there is. Like I think there is some like many different calls to like this Melange compiler that are like not the fastest way to do it, but the UI is good, so we still use it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And what about like the future? Like knowing that the start, Backstream got born, even though there were like JSO, JSO OCaml. Now I think 8 or 9 years passed. Rescript got its own like kind of path, but then Melange is trying to again be part of the OCaml to JavaScript compilation, or reason to JavaScript compilation. How do you see the future? Because like eventually nobody wants to have two ways to compile to JavaScript. Um,
I'm not sure
one
that's
is
true.
okay,
Why
okay.
why would people not want many ways to do the same thing? I mean, it's like if you look at other languages, actually, like many of them have different ways to do the same thing, right? So why not in OCaml? Like it's like I mean, it's
Right,
like
right.
as long as the projects don't die, it's not like Melange is attacking Jizu or Jizu is attacking Melange, right? It's like people don't hate each other.
Right.
They are not like fighting for users. I think the
Right.
targets are a
Right.
little bit
So
different.
you would want different ways of compiling to a JavaScript because the same competition. That's kind of like true. And
No,
you would. Mhm.
to me, it's not the same competition. It's more that I think it targets different audience. It tries to do
Mhm.
different things. So like
Right.
one example would be during one of the recent conference, we wanted to like do a workshop and we wanted to show ATDGen, which is a tool we use in
Right.
Ahrefs a lot to parse and write JSON. So it's kind of protobuf, but for JSON.
Yeah. It's what gives us
And
type safety from front end all the way down. Sorry, back end all the way down.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
And so there is this, so you have like as with protobuf or like with GraphQL2, you have a definition, you have a file
Mhm.
with type definitions. And from those definition, you derive OCaml code or Python code or TypeScript code. It supports multiple languages. But so to do so, you need a like ATDGen binary. And with in the recent conference, you have people using Linux, Windows, Mac, different version, whatever. So how do you give a
Right.
binary that everyone can use? So in 2 minutes, I just went into the ATDGen repo and I enabled GS of OCaml compilation inside Dune. And now my binary is actually a JS file that I can run in Node.js.
Right.
And I don't think that Melange aims to do that.
Right.
Because then
Yeah,
in
I
Melange, you
think
will
that
have
that's the
what?
magic. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree.
In
Yeah.
Melange, you will have one file per module or something like this,
Yeah.
which means I will
You
need to run Webpack or something like
like
this
you
later
could,
on.
yeah, you could, but you would face a few problems. Like Marshall, for example, that it's the encoding decoding on bytes that doesn't work in Melange,
But it
and
doesn't
you
work
have
in
like
GS of OCaml, I think, too.
yeah, but I think you can stop it, right? I think you can,
Yeah, but
right?
I would say like most of the time, actually, you don't
Yeah,
care because like it's like corner cases. It's just that
yeah,
the
yeah. The
UI they
experience,
provide is good
yeah,
enough for OCaml people. And like Melange, it provides like the nice what FFI, for example, to interact with JavaScript code.
yeah,
The way it outputs code is closer to the JavaScript world too, I would say. So it's easier
yeah,
to make a Webpack or other tools like this work together.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree that those are different targets. It just, my point of view was more like, okay, just of OCaml, the crazy thing is that you have like entire project in OCaml. You add one line saying Dune, compile to modes.js, please. And then you have like you have a single file that it's compiled to JavaScript. That's insane. So if you have, for example, a compiler written in Menir, it's a language to write compilers in OCaml. You can compile it with to JavaScript like in one line, or any sort of library, even drivers, even like any sort of thing that you can imagine. That's the value proposition, or I think that what gets people to try JS OCaml very fast. But on the contra, like documentation is very bad. So it's the classic OCaml project that you need to understand 50% of the project to even start it. So that's kind of like for people like me, or like I invest a lot of time trying just OCaml and even try to write bindings to React and succeed. But I did not succeed convincing people in Ahrefs to like front ends of Ahrefs to try just OCaml. So that's for me that was the that technology is not it's not good enough for prime time or not good enough to convince my team, then yeah, there's no way to convince any other. And on the opposite, Melange kind of fits together the low barrier to try and good documentation, and 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 at some point it gets complex, but the ease of experience, I think it's much better. But yeah, you don't have like a one line. You need to invest a little bit on building the integration with your front end or your pipeline. but yeah, once it's done, it works. But yeah, you would never do that with ATG. The experience
Yeah.
that you did, that's not gonna happen with Melange.
It's funny how you say it, and it's true that it's easier. Like many things in Melange are easier
Right?
to experiment with, and at the same time, it's more complicated. For example,
Okay.
in GS of OCaml, you have a clear separation between OCaml types and JavaScript types.
Right.
So a string that is an OCaml string is a different type from
Oof, good
JavaScript
topic.
string,
Good
right?
topic. Yeah, yeah. So you have like a wrapper, right? Yep.
And so it's very explicit, and I mean it's good for the OCaml person, because then you know when this is the part of the language you are comfortable with, and then when it starts with JS, it's like, okay, be careful
Yep.
because you don't know what you are doing,
Right.
right? And so it's like this is kind of easy and clear in
Oh,
JS of
really?
OCaml. No, but I mean, because it's like, it's like very easy. You see JS dot, and then now
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have a JavaScript value, right?
Yeah.
And in Melange, it's okay. Your string is what, and
Right.
so and you have to deal with like the encoding. Like, what is the actual encoding of a string in
Yeah.
OCaml?
So, do you remember that they
Uh,
said that every time that I'll talk with a backend person, they always mention the runtime? It's exactly that moment. It's like always, like you always think about the runtime.
Actually, I'm
Uh,
not sure. I think,
and it's not the runtime itself, but like the encoding, it's kind of like the so like in Melange, for example, like of course all the types, not of course, but like all the types that you have in the language are the kind of the same representation as a JavaScript values. So for example, a string is a string, integer is a number, a float is a number, and so on and so forth. Variant is kind of like an object, or a record is an object, and of course, like we map, we like Melange maps perfectly, or as good as possible to JavaScript values. But it's curious that you said that when every time that you work with JS or OCaml, once you see JS dot whatever is the namespace, and you know that you're treating with things that come from the client. But for example, is that's a barrier for people that tried Rescript or tried Melange on the first place, because they don't understand why. Like, why do I need a
yeah.
wrapper? Like, why do we need a generic for a type that I already have? And because it's like kind of the mentality of why do I need
But
to care about the runtime?
yeah, and you basically you pay a cost, but at a different time. Like in JS of OCaml, you pay the cost very early, because as soon as you
Right.
write code, you need to make the difference between the two words. While in Melange, you will only pay the cost if you write a FFI and you need to care about the representation.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like if there is a string with something weird in it, like you don't know the encoding of the string, for example, then you need to be careful. So the
Right.
experience by default is much easier. It's just that when you are dealing with the boundaries, then it's like things can be a bit more implicit, and you need to know the language better to do things the right way.
Yeah.
So it's easier, and it's actually more complicated in some bits.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you look now at James O'Connell and Melange are very drawn line. Like you can very draw a line between like the trade-offs, right? Like in one side it's very clear, one side the other is very clear. Now I would say that I'm comfortable saying that both are balanced for the users. Even Rescript now, like the three are in the for me now. I have a feeling like the three of projects are in the right column.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like you can classify them perfectly now. So if you get into, oh, I want to try this ML or like OCaml whatever language uh, as a whole, you can choose the like based on your team or your decisions, you can choose clearly one or another.
And yeah, actually, so you said you couldn't like sell GS of OCaml to Href,
Right.
but we
Hmm.
can probably talk a bit about how, like, what was the discussion, what happened.
Right.
It's like because
Right.
Javi and you actually like tried to do something so that it could happen. Like you work on
Yep.
this React bindings, and then you try to show that it could work, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and in a way, I think that GS of OCaml, it could fit what we do,
It
because
fits perfectly.
we don't depend on a lot of external code. So like once very interesting thing in Melange is that the FFI is very, very good. So it's kind of easy, convenient to interface with other existing JavaScript libraries.
Right.
But in Href, we have bindings to what, like React, and then like maybe like one or two library to deal with the timestamps and like charts. But we don't
Yeah.
have like millions of bindings. We have like, maybe like 5 big libraries we have
Yeah.
bindings for, and then a bunch of smaller stuff. So we don't bind to so many things, and we don't need a FFI that is amazing. Like it's not a priority. So
Right.
GS of OCaml could have worked.
Could have worked. I agree.
And the fact that even in this perfect setup for GS of OCaml it fails is interesting.
Yeah.
It's like you like find the right company with like many OCaml people, many people who understand GS of OCaml, and you don't need what is like one of the best feature of Melange, and still
Yep.
this is not actually the tool that won at the end.
Yeah, that's true. Like the experience, I think that's exactly what you said. It's like it could work, right? Like theoretically, if you look at Ahrefs from the outside, or even if you look it far from the front end, it makes a lot of sense. Once we were working on this, I was working on this middle end team. Before it was not called middle end, but yeah, I was working on the middle end. So like most of my assumptions were like, oh, it's gonna work perfectly, right? Um, so because what you said, right? And then when we try to how can we write React? We're married to React. I think we like the model of components, we like the model of data, we like the composition. We're not going to change React. Let's bind it to React. So we create kind of like the same PPX and the same library to React. I think that was like a start. How we started, and then we end up finishing. Same, I did the emotion binding, so like I know the CSS, everything kind of like worked, and we felt like JS of OCaml was like very mature. But there were like a few problems that you could not solve easily at the time. That they were like at the time, JS of OCaml didn't have Unicode support. Now they have some sort of Unicode support, or the parsing. I haven't followed that closely, but you would need like you would need another library to run to get the Unicode support that in Melange or Backers at the time was natively. That was an issue. The other issue, or biggest issue that you cannot bypass, is that JS of OCaml you compile it in one file, right? One gigantic file. So incremental migrations were or very hard or very difficult to iterate over time. So like you could migrate parts of the app, but then you will need to compile everything in both, have duplicated apps. Uh, so like it was definitely not the migration path was kind of impossible. Um, we could try it. We try. I think we tried in one of the small apps. I think we could try word count. Is one vertical we have at Ahrefs with JS programming. And once we were trying those, we found like the wrapper. It was very hard to sell. The wrapper is like the JST that we call it in Risp or in JS programming. I think it's JS.object. But yeah, it's unsafe. You have JS.unsafe. There are many representations you can interact with JavaScript differently from what would you do with the bindings. And that part was that was like not like with these three things that I said. Rusty, which is like one of the let's say he's the only tech lead at Ahrefs, like the only person that it's the CTO of the front end, how I call it. He was like kind of like the person who we need to convince to migrate the front end, and he was definitely not on board with the idea. I think that's the main reason. He would chat with other people, and people would say, yeah, fine. If Javi and David are happy, then we are all happy. But even though that we migrate one small app, we didn't feel that was like the experience was worse, right? Like the user experience of iterating over React components was worse, or even data was worse because you had like these wrapper. So
It's
at the
funny
end,
that
yeah,
they were too honest in the way they name functions in the API. For example, all those unsafe function.
right.
they exist in every FFI. It's just not called
Yeah,
unsafe.
yeah, that's true.
But because it's called unsafe, people are like, I'm
Don't
never
touch it.
going to
Yeah,
use this. You are not supposed
yeah,
to use it. Yes, you're
yeah,
supposed to use it. Just be careful when you do it.
yeah. One. I think you explained me that anecdote is that somebody asked Xavier Leroy, the creator, the author of OCaml. They asked, what do you think about object.magic? Right, object.magic is the method of OCaml that you can in like unsafe coerce any variable, right? Like you can lie to the type check and say, trust me, this is a whatever, like an array and it's a list or whatever. And he answer was, it's like when you're walking in the street, would you inject how is that called? I don't remember the thing, but would you become a junkie? Like you get a kind of like a charinga, I don't know how to say in English, but would you inject kind of like some random thing on the street? Uh, that's not part of the language. Um, that I think you explained that anecdote, or maybe how you don't remember, but
Yeah,
how do
I
you
think it's
how do you
Javier, but
see? Yeah, I think it's Javi. But how do you see the kind of like the purity of OCaml? Do you think that the OCaml is very pure, or has some kind of like pragmatism on safety? Because of course it's type safe. Of course the compiler when it compiles it works, but you can bypass it from time to time. So what's your opinion?
I mean, I don't think it's pure in any way,
Right.
shape, or form.
Hmm.
Uh,
But
I
you
mean, you
you
have,
can you can write pure code, right?
yes, you can write pure code, but I mean, for example, you have exceptions that are very pregnant, that are everywhere. Uh,
Right.
and you don't have any way to know if a function can raise an exception or not.
Right.
Or, I mean, okay, it depends what kind of program you write, but basic things like you run your program, like a CLI that is
Hmm.
running, I don't know, downloading something, and you press Control C like you want to stop your program, right?
Right.
And it's a signal, and in OCaml it will like kind of raise an exception that you can catch, and you can do something with it, right? And so at any point in time, the user of your CLI can come and interrupt the program, right?
Hmm.
Which means at any point in your program you need to like be able to deal with this interruption.
Right.
So it's like, as soon as you have this, where is the purity? Like what is
Right.
uh, you have no like, yeah, good way to protect yourself against all these kind of issues. At the same time, I'm probably biased because I have been using the language for long. It's like it provides you what is good enough.
Hmm.
And there was some improvements because I don't know if you remember, but at sometime the strings were mutable in OCaml.
Yeah. Yeah.
By
Yeah. I read
default,
about it.
the strings were actually what is called bytes nowadays. So
Hmm.
and it has been a big change. Like people had to fight to turn bytes into string,
Okay.
and because it was
Okay.
breaking code, obviously.
Right.
So there was more mutability. It was not as pure as it is nowadays. I would say that the balance is not too bad.
Right.
Um, could it be more? Probably. So there are some things that we cannot really express in OCaml, like a ownership of a value, like you open a connection to a database, like you have a handler or something like this that you want to use only at one point in time and you don't want to
Right.
share, right? You have no way to express it. Um, and you cannot really protect yourself against a steal. Like the code can take that value, put it in a global reference, and it can be suddenly reused elsewhere.
Right.
So this is where, for example, the local global stuff,
Yeah. Solves exactly that issue. Yeah.
yeah, this kind of issue.
Yeah.
Um, so is it a problem? Yes. Is it a problem that we face at work? Yes. Like for example, we see like we have one problem where people can open the connection to a DB using one of those like a common pattern in the OCaml to do like with DB, for example, and then you pass a continuation, like you pass a function, and then this with DB function will create like a DB handler and pass it to your function later on. But inside your function, you can do one more with DB. This is something that you probably want to forbid because you don't want to open connections after connection after connection when there is already one available.
Right.
And for now, like, how do you fix this? Like, and so this is an actual problem, and you have no good solution. But I mean, maybe you write kind of different code than I do. You write code that is in the browser or like just behind the browser. So maybe you have like different views. You have to deal with more mutability than I do. For example, the whole DOM
But we
before
are
React.
from,
Yeah, but before React, like no one assumed that anything was immutable in a browser.
right.
Everything could be changed at any point in time.
Yeah, yeah. That's why in the browser, like many APIs were pushing for observables, right? Like you accept mutability into all your values, and then you say, oh, any value can change at any time. And you need to subscribe to listen to the changes or not, and that's kind of like the trend of. I think that was like one of the biggest inclusions of ES6.4 that they get published, and they tried with ES5, and it didn't get to the language neither. That are like these observables concept. I think they come from React.js, and they come from like reactive programming from, I don't know, 30 years ago, and where sometimes reactivity is very useful. Before React, I would say that not many people did kind of like immutability was not part of their kind of like fashion of writing code. Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
for you,
We're
like,
abstracted, right? Like we are very far from those problems. Like we do mutability in a few places. Kind of, for example, like we have a global theme, a CSS theme, right? Like, yeah, you can have like a dark or light theme, and we interact with the browser directly. We opt out from React to do that because the performance is better. So you can load that at the beginning. You can then load React later. But the way it's just like very self-contained, right? Like you would never want to write your data reactive. I mean, maybe you want, but for example, for Ahrefs, it doesn't make any sense because our data is like you have tabular data that never changes on your session, right? It's not live data. It's like you open a report, and the report is the moment in time that you request. There's no live thing. And nothing is very reactive in the nature. So yeah, for us, it's just like a perfect sense.
so you will be happy with more purity?
Would I be happy for purity? No,
Would you wish like to have a language that is closer to Haskell, that is like
no, I don't think so. I think I think no, because purity in some places makes your life so much better, right? But often you want the tools to be pure. So like libraries that you create or you consume need to be pure, but your application needs to do all sorts of things, right? Like your application, or when you are a kind of like product engineer, you want to just ship fast. And if somebody gets you in your way, and you cannot store it globally and deal with it later, or store it globally and be safe and then forget about it, then and you need to do things perfectly and draw the line and architect things, that slows you down insanely. So I think the line in OCaml is very, very, very well positioned, where you can opt out, do your life easy, and then move back and run fast. But yeah, my tools to be pure, or like libraries that I'm using, or even, I know I'm working on style PPX, so like making type safe like your styles. I think that's kind of something that I've been pushing. But yeah, like you want that tool to be type safe. You don't want like do all your things on your app perfectly, like to mount it perfectly. Mostly because like on the web everything is kind of like changing all the time. On the backend it's a little bit different, but on the web, like iterations are just like much more common than on the
faster?
backend.
Yeah. I find it interesting that everyone is pushing for like immutable stuff. At least my impression is that in the front end, React maybe didn't create this trend, but kind of made it popular. My
Yeah,
understanding is that you deal with the DOM as an immutable object. Uh, like you never manipulate the DOM directly anymore. Like you do it through
yeah.
React, and so you have an immutable object more or less,
Mhm.
which goes against many things that happened historically in a browser. The way the DOM is implemented is completely not like this.
Yeah,
And it has some interesting benefits, like you can have any extension in your browser that are changing part of your page.
yeah.
And I'm using one daily, like I'm using Dashlane to store my passwords.
Mhm.
And it does stuff where if there is a input field, it's creating a pop-up and I can click like
Yeah,
input my password in that specific field, right? So to do this, it
yeah,
has to inject HTML in the page actually. Um, but it breaks some apps are crashing because of this. Like some websites are
yeah,
they're not crashing. They will just see that there is a change coming from my extension and they will just discard it and re-render without my stuff, right?
yeah,
But so it goes against many things that happened for like 20 years more or less,
yeah,
and you have to make both of those worlds still somehow
yeah.
work together.
Yeah, I think React did. I think not even React, I think Meta did that all the time. Like they push for a solution that is way better in some areas, but destroys previous effort insanely. For example, like with GraphQL, I think it's kind of happened the same. They say, yeah, you can have one endpoint. It's going to be through post, and you yeah, you would call this endpoint all the time, which goes against completely about REST, what we were doing before.
Yeah,
But of course, like with other trade-offs, and if you go 10 times, like 10 years back, and you say to a person, "No, we call all the time the same endpoint," you would say, "Ah, you guys are stupid." Uh,
yeah.
but
Restful was a trend.
exactly right. Restful, you would need to add the link to go to the next resource. Like, of course, like all the people would scream at you. And similarly happens now with server components, right? I don't know if you are following the thing, but again, they are pushing for a new concept that they have mined in their kind of business and works well, and the rest of people are like, no, that's just like insanity. Um, but yeah, I think React the first kind of concept is like the insert and update are the same operations, right? That there's no create the DOM and then update the DOM. It's always like do the thing, right? It's like just re-render, uh, and just because they push for that approach, and they delay, of course, like the first load is going to be slower. You don't have serialization, so then later updates are going to be faster.
But
If
I think
you
actually even the later update are slower, no? Because you need React to do this like diff between the two versions and to
Mhm.
only update the relevant part of the DOM.
Right,
So like React is doing what the browser was actually doing. Like you are duplicating
right,
the work.
right.
And you
You
are
need the
doing it
work.
in JavaScript, which is slow, right? The browser was doing it in like a
Right.
very
I think
optimized
that's,
C++.
yeah, fair point. But the DOM is fast enough. I think I read it like a lot of articles about anti-React that the DOM is fast enough. Um, but I think that's kind of like these benchmarks are nonsense. Like those benchmarks, even the benchmarks that I would call it micro benchmarks. If you micro branch, like I don't know what's faster, implement like some charting library, mutable to DOM and using whatever vanilla JavaScript, or using React. Of course, you can outperform React, um, but at what costs, right? Like the cost of creating two charts, like two components of a chart, the API nicely, blah blah blah, blah, rather than mutating the DOM all the time. That's just like super expensive. Like when you work in for example, for Ahrefs, I think we have like I don't know 2 million lines of code in Reason. I don't know, like 5,000 components, like some insane amount of number of components. If you do that in kind of like a mutable or um, or maybe not mutual, but maybe just going to the DOM and listening to them and hoping that like everybody's a good citizen. It just like you would slow down development so hard that it doesn't make any sense, right? So I think React draws this line where virtual DOM is like if you know how to create your structures, know how to like trigger the renders, I think can be as good as the DOM, of course. But in general terms, I think it's good enough. So I think the balance is very OCaml like you know that Jordan was behind when you
Yeah.
know that Jordan is an OCamler that knows this balance that
But
yeah.
it's funny because you could say that, for example, Facebook has enough resources to make it work, right? They could have decided uh, it's going to be more troublesome for our developers, but we are going to offer like a faster experience for the uh, customers, like the
Yeah.
people actually visiting the website. But even them, with like their infinite resources, they decided to go in a different direction. So is it
Yeah.
because it's a tech company? Like, is it like I feel that
Hmm.
some big tech company they run the way they do because they are led by like technical people, so they can make technical choices instead of like business choices sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I
Uh,
think React is that's that case, right? Like that when you I think I saw the documentary about React and it's more like the idea just spread it everywhere. I think they have the competing kind of like library. Like, I don't know how I think it's was called Jax or something. I don't remember the name. But they have a competing library that was written with PHP and XML and like the whole stack on Meta back in the days. And the idea of React just spread everywhere. So like the point that you made before of developer experience beats everything in the early days, I think that it just applied exponentially because at some point they released it publicly. Everybody hated JSX, and then after 1 year, it was like the most famous library used. And then from now on, like the kind of the monopoly went for I don't know 4 years. I don't know, like so many years that now everybody has the component model, the hooks, state. So like kind of like spread the idea everywhere. So yeah, it's interesting, but I think it's just like they nail it. So
yeah. How smart do you need to be like Jordan and be correct about React was the right thing to do and like to do it properly, and then Reason was the right thing to do and to do it properly?
how smart need to do? Yeah, I don't know. Unquantifiable, I would say. I
Uh,
don't know. Yeah, hard to quantify smartness. It's hard to quantify smartness, but I think it's even harder for when you look at the like what Jordan has been doing. I think Jordan is the kind of person when you speak with him, he talks or he says things that doesn't make sense at the beginning, and it's his way of kind of like thinking, like he's thinking, I don't know, 3-5 years ahead, and when he explains the idea to you, you are like, I got the sense that I didn't understood anything, right? And after a few months, you start saying, oh, right, it made sense. So yeah, it's I think everybody on the React team only says how brilliant Jordan is. So yeah.
It's interesting that you interviewed Rudy, the author of
Mhm.
Dune, and
Yep.
he said that even him, for example, originally when he saw the Reason syntax, he was like, "Meh, like what is this thing? Like yet again."
Right.
And but he said, yeah, at the end it was right to make it more approachable. Like this
Yep.
was from like a user experience perspective, it's a clear benefit.
Yeah. I love that interview because Rudy said exactly that. Like, oh, at the beginning, Reason felt like a toy, but then we were doing tooling for OCaml and the language and a lot of work on the actual language, and Reason was the thing that bring more people on OCaml that we never ever did. So even though it's not a competing language, even though like the person that created has so much kind of like power into kind of the front end people. Even that, uh, the number of people that got into Camel community, it was bigger than any other kind of like effort that we made. So which for me is like super funny at the end of the day, because most of us came from the JavaScript and end up doing OCaml and kind of like mixing everything. But that was the
It's
idea.
it's funny how you need a little bit of luck for all those things to work. Like you need, for example, Rudy to decide early on, okay, I don't really trust this thing, but I still I'm a good citizen, so I will add the
And
support
integrated, yeah.
inside June.
Yeah, that's very
And if you,
novel.
yeah, it's like if you don't have those like people who are able to like compute, okay, uh, this is maybe good or maybe bad, and like are able to balance their opinion versus like the community thing, and they have to do it early enough, like at the right time. So it's
Yeah,
interesting that
but
somehow it
of
works.
course, like so, like not what everything Jordan says is correct, in the
No, no,
sense of,
not like
I think in the sense of like, of course, he created stuff that was definitely not on Shape or not on the area of success of React, of course. So like, I think he created React and then React Native. Of course, like the both are insanely successful. Reason I would call it successful as well. But then he pushed the idea of easy, right? Um, and easy is the package manager that is still somehow used, and some people love it. Even myself, I have like a lot of respect for easy and use it from time to time. Um, that you can consume JavaScript libraries, npm packages as well, like OPAM packages, and this project has been like suffering for long. That it's definitely not the right solution, or at least it didn't like create this idea, this seeding idea to the rest of people to continue pushing for it.
but this is one of those tools where I think the technical implementation was good, but the UI was not great.
Right.
Like the output is just not nice. For example, like
The
you
output.
run it, yes, like you run it and then it displays some.
You mean the UI, the actual UI of
Yeah,
the CLI?
yeah, because it's OPAM, which is not the most fancy tool ever, but still, when you OPAM install, it
Fair.
has some colors,
Fair.
and it
Fair
doesn't
comparison.
display like it doesn't display one line per action. Like it's some kind of somehow clean output that
Right.
Easy doesn't have. So
Yeah.
you had to like learn this weird JSON syntax to put your package, and
Weird
it out,
syntax, right?
it outputs ugly text after that. Like
Yeah.
so, so
That's
yeah, so
way too
the
much.
idea was very good, but the UI was not completely working.
Yeah. I think Easy has some like, people call it state of the art ideas, kind of like the end goal of our package manager. What do you want to do? We want to use, but the efforts of maintaining the overrides or being on top of all the libraries or even compile is easy. Like there's a lot of maintenance that needs to get done, and at some point we have like a team of, I think, 6-7 persons working on it, and that experience was very good. But from when kind of like the reason got a little bit lost, the steam, those people just like, of course, like when the tech companies start hiring, well, tech companies no, but like the blockchain companies started hiring all of them to work for Web3, and paying them insanely amount of money. Then the project got a little bit carried over. So yeah, it got a little bit like less maintained, and then just like in a kind of like a stale mode that you can use, but yeah, you could get yeah, not
This
as
is
good as Open.
exactly why there is no Rust code inside Ahrefs,
Right.
because all the developers got stolen by the blockchain
Fair.
companies. So
That's fair. That's fair. I think, Louis, we are running out of time. Like, for me, it's daytime. I can do stuff, but for you, it's definitely nighttime. So
yes,
yeah, I can talk with you for hours and hours. But I think the show is reaching to a point to finish. It was a pleasure to have you. Of
that was a
course,
pleasure.
if somebody attends to ICFP, please go to Louis. I think he's the party manager, and as well like a person very interesting to
Party.
talk to. So yeah, please bother him. I think he's on Seattle on September. So
Yeah, Seattle,
um,
like September 4 to 9, I think, something like this. And it will be online too this year. So I think it will be online and for free. So all the talks, at least all the ML, maybe
The
not
workshop,
ML,
right?
but the OCaml workshop will be
Right.
online for free.
Nice.
So there is no need to travel all the way to Seattle to see the talks, at least to see the
Makes sense. Makes sense. In
all
this
the
area, in this era of internet, I think that makes sense. Cool. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here. You have been a little bit quiet today, but that was perfect. And thanks, Louis, to spend time with us.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.
See you guys.